When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Bad Luck. User: Sant76er. Posted October 13th, 1996.
My dad is not a good guy. He's never been unkind to us, but he's a criminal who makes a living by causing trouble for other people. As far as crime goes, it's not interesting or complicated. Mostly he just steals things, and sometimes people get hurt in the process. Considering everything he's done over the years, he's had an incredible amount of luck avoiding consequences. I say had because I think he picked the wrong person for his most recent stunt, and as a result, his luck has run out. You know Beanie Babies? Those crappy little stuffed toys people are losing their minds over? Well, my old man started up a pretty lucrative little sideline and stealing them from stores and selling them on eBay. If you know what to look for and how to find the people who want them, there's a surprising amount of money to be made there. That wasn't enough for Dad, though, and he decided to shop in bulk by robbing cases of the things from UPS trucks. See, Dad noticed Beanie Babies ship in boxes with a big red heart on them, so he started staking out delivery routes to determine who would be carrying the boxes and when, then ripping them off. It was working as well as any of Dad's scams until one of the drivers came back while he was still in the truck. They got into a fight and Dad beat the guy unconscious. Then, to add insult to injury, he not only took the boxes of toys, but he robbed the guy too, taking his wallet and rings. The beating was bad enough to put the driver in a coma, something we found out when a local Fox affiliate picked up the story and broadcast it while we were sitting in front of the TV having dinner. They interviewed the man's wife, who held up well considering her husband was breathing through a tube. Again, we were not afraid of Dad ourselves, and this wasn't the first time we knew he'd hurt somebody, but something was different. As the news report went on, the air in the house began to feel heavier and heavier. I could tell that my sister Macy felt it because the second it started, she dropped her fork and looked around nervously. Dad never said anything, but he is a tell. When he's nervous or scared, his leg bounces, and a couple seconds after the shift, his leg went into overdrive. I can't say for sure, but I don't think he slept at all that night. I got up to use the bathroom around 2 a.m. and could smell cigarette smoke wafting out from under his bedroom door. He only smokes in bed if something's really bothering him, though, again, he'd never talk about it to us. He looked like hell in the morning, his eyes bloodshot and red-rimmed. It didn't improve when Uncle Sal, Dad's business partner, came by just after 10:30. I heard him tell Dad that the warehouse where they stashed all their stuff had caught fire in the night. No one seemed to know exactly how it happened or when, just that by the time anyone noticed the smoke, all their gear had been reduced to ashes. 2 hours after that, we got a call from St. Mary the Divine Hospital telling us that Grandma Evie, Dad's mom, had been admitted with a stroke and he needed to get there right away. She didn't last the night. The whole time these things were happening, the mood in the house got worse and getting worse. I've been the housekeeper ever since Mom left, and I keep that place spotless, but the walls started to look dirty, like they hadn't been wiped in weeks. It even felt dimmer somehow, like the light from outside wasn't able to get all the way through the windows. We weren't close with Grandma Evie, but Dad took it hard. He drank heavily that night, more than I've ever seen him drink before. He sat in his favorite chair, staring into space as if trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Marcy and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do or say to comfort him. He eventually passed out, and when he did, I heard something heavy clunking to the ground, an ornate ring I'd never seen before. This had to be the one he'd taken from the UPS driver, the one thing that hadn't gone up in the warehouse fire. I dropped it into Dad's shirt pocket, tilted his head to the side so he wouldn't choke himself if he threw up, and went upstairs with Marcy to our rooms. The heaviness in the house got worse and worse, so much that it felt like sound itself couldn't travel, like we were in a vacuum. I could dimly hear Dad snoring and snorting downstairs, but it was impossibly far away, as if in a dream. The pressure became so strong it was like gravity had doubled. Just getting up out of bed required an incredible amount of effort. Then, just after midnight, it stopped, and the night's usual noises flooded back in. Exhausted, I fell asleep. In the morning, Dad had yet another hangover and was grumbling about having lost something. I asked him what he was talking about, and he waved me away, so I made coffee and started to throw together breakfast as usual while he hunted around underneath his easy chair. Later, I overheard him on the phone with Uncle Sal saying that he'd lost the ring he'd taken from the UPS driver. In 3 days, he said, he'd lost everything. The irony of him saying that while one of his 2 daughters made him breakfast was now lost on me. I think it might take more than bad luck for my dad to change his ways, so my new goal is to do what I can to get Marcy and me out of here before the next time he brings unearthly punishment down on himself and those around him.
Subject, Under the Eclipse. User, 5repealand22. Posted, September 4th, 1996.
My Uncle Chris used to be a cop in a small town here in Pennsylvania. I can't say exactly where, but it's a quiet place with the usual amount of small-town crime, domestic violence, break-and-enters, property damage. Nothing particularly remarkable ever happened within the city limits. Outside the city limits, however, something strange has been happening, off and on for years, and it eventually convinced him to leave the department. To this day, the police station in Chris's town still gets reports from local hunters and farmers about hooded figures walking around the forest in groups. It happens less now, I'm told, but it still happens. They're never doing anything obviously threatening, but everyone who sees them eventually ends up freaking out and calling the cops. There's just something about these guys that makes people hit the panic button. Sometimes, folks also find what look like altars or ceremonial sites out in the woods, and we're talking way out there, 5, even 10 miles into deep bush. I live about 45 minutes away from this place, have never seen them, and would like to keep it that way. When Chris had his run-in with them, it was December 30th, 1982. I know the specific date because It happened during the lunar eclipse, which I don't think was an accident. Chris was on patrol and responded to a call from Mr. Avolio, who owned a rural property outside of town. I don't know exactly what time the call came in, but the partial eclipse had apparently begun. When Chris got to the property, Mr. Avolio told him that groups of these hooded men had been walking up and down the tree line near his property. They had been carrying torches and seemed to be placing objects. Mr. Avolio couldn't say exactly what those objects were, but the whole experience was frightening his family and disturbing his animals. Chris could see what looked like torches out at the edge of the forest and decided he should call for backup just in case. After radioing into dispatch, he walked across the field to find a group of 8 men wearing what appeared to be robes and carrying literal torches. Chris identified himself, and the men turned to observe him, but didn't acknowledge him in any other way. They just stood there, torches in hand, watching him. Chris was and is a big guy who can throw down with the best of them, but it's a last resort. Besides, as he always says when telling this story, 8-on-1 is a fight you only win in the movies. He tried reasoning with the men to get them to move along. Not one of them spoke. According to Chris, they didn't so much as move a muscle. A creeping fear set in, and he suddenly regretted not waiting till his backup had arrived. It was shortly after this fear manifested itself that the strangest thing happened. Chris says one of the men began speaking to him in a way he said both hurt and felt good to listen to. He cannot recall what the man said to him, just that it sounded like it was coming from over a broken radio or something like that. However he did it, the man convinced my uncle to let them all walk away without providing any identifying information. All Chris remembers is the men fading out slightly. And then he came to with Peter and Craig, his backup, trying to get his attention. Up to 10 minutes had elapsed, but he has no memory of what happened or where the men went. There wasn't much time to deal with whatever had happened to Chris, however, as they heard shouting from inside the house. Mr. Avolio had had some kind of seizure and needed immediate medical attention. Given the distance from the ambulance station to the property, Mr. Avolio's odds were better if the officers took him directly to the hospital in a patrol car, so together they loaded him into Craig's cruiser. Once it taken off, Chris and Peter went back out to search the tree line for the men, but they were long gone. Mr. Avolio was okay, as it happens. The doctors never could figure out what had gone wrong, and he was sent home the next day. Chris has never been a believer in ghosts or stuff like that, and so far as I know, that hasn't changed. He believes the men somehow hypnotized him or drugged him that night. He wrestled with it for a long time. Something about the total loss of autonomy really got into his head, and he resigned without warning in the summer of '83. He's lived in Portland, Maine, working on fish boats ever since. Never comes back here anymore, so if you want to see him, we have to go out east, and if you want to hear this story, you have to get him really, really drunk. A friend of mine works as dispatch at Chris's old detachment, and those calls still come in. They're less frequent now, so either the men got bored or whatever it was they were trying to accomplish out there in the trees is done, and now they just have to make sure they maintain it. If that is the case, I don't even know what it would be, but thinking about it makes me queasy. Maybe it's better not knowing some things.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.